Hello and welcome to the 153rd edition of the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast. In Nashville, Tennessee, I'm Professor Matt Perkins. And a hop, skip, and a jump across the Harpeth River here in the Music City, it's our own offensive coordinator, the coach, Corey Burton.
Well, you know this. Week one starts for us this week. We host Columbia Central, the Lions. They put it on us a year ago, 40-0. So we're looking for
nowhere to go but up, right, Coach?
That's right. So we look to put a few more points up on the board, but I feel a lot better where we are right now than we were this time a year ago. So it should be interesting on Friday night. But without further ado, let's get into our show.
Yeah, man. Well, we can't do that without the third amigo in the second city, a man who has a new favorite Turkish beer. It's our intrepid blogger from Big Ten and Counting, Josh Cook.
Yeah, it was fun to share that with you, Matt. And for our listeners who care about such trivial things, Matt was in Chicago for a quick 24-hour stay. His beautiful wife was attending a friend's bachelorette party, and so Matt and I got to have a little day of bachelorhood, kind of.
Yeah, good times. It involved Turkish food and video games. So can't complain about either of those things.
Definitely not.
Later on today's show, we're going to get into the Sun Belt Conference, but first, it's time to tackle the Big 12. Or should I say, we're going to miss a tackle on the Big 12 because that's what the defenses do in that conference. We're going to go top to bottom alphabetical order, then worst to first rankings and conference superlatives like we have for all of the other conferences that we have previewed so far this season. I drew the short straw, so I have to do the school whose name I avoided saying all of last season, but it's a new year. I am readopting the name Baylor into the lexicon. We have other fish to fry. We will never stop, talking about everything that happened at Baylor and has happened at subsequent schools throughout college football. But for now, we're going to stick to on the field. So we're going to head up to Waco, where, much like Chip and Joanna Gaines, we have quite the fixer-upper to do in Baylor. Year one was not especially kind to Matt Rule in Waco, but that was to be expected. Now, in year two, he's trying to combine his Temple tough mentality with the wide-open offenses of the Big 12. Coming into the season, the Bears have a couple of key things going for them on offense. Charlie Brewer is back after a surprisingly good freshman year after starting last season number 3 on the depth chart. The former 3-star signal caller out of Lake Travis was very effective on third and long, a situation that the Bears found themselves in quite often. But in third and long last season, he was 19 of 25 for 216 yards and 3 scores. Brewer will be blessed with a bevy of options to throw to, however. The Bears return 7 of their top 8 receivers from last season and add Tennessee transfer Jalen Hurd. He is a superstar athlete that will be adapting to both a new school and a new position. He had played running back while he was with the Vols. The line, though, should be solid. They return 6 players with starting experience and add 2 key graduate transfers in Jake Frumorgan from Clemson and Christian Beard from national champion UCF. On the defensive side of the ball, last year, it was a very, very rough going. Between transfers and injuries, the Bears ranked near last in most defensive metrics. With another year of experience, their young players, aided by transfer James Lockhart and Derek Thomas, should be an improvement. Coordinator Phil Snow has a very tough task in front of him, though, but he proved that he was up to the challenge during his time with Rule at Temple. But going against Big 12 offenses on a week-to-week basis is a whole different ball game. Expect the Bears to be very solid in the kicking game, though, as they return all of their specialists and who are underclassmen as well. Watch out for returner Drew Gallitz. He had a 45.2 yard average on return last year, kick returns, I should say, last year, before he injured his knee. But he should be a go-to start the season. So he'll be back there on opening day returning kicks, and he might house one, so watch out for that. We'll know pretty soon, though, into the season if Baylor is going to be able to make a run at a bowl game. Games at Duke and Kansas State before the halfway mark of the season will be the deciding factors on a postseason berth for this squad. Personally, I think they'll fall just short 5-7, but I believe in Matt Rule, and I think there's a chance that they can return to the upper part of the league within the next 2 to 3 seasons. Which is where our next squad, Josh, hopes to be joining them.
Yeah, I've got the Iowa State Cyclones, and I really like what this program's been doing. They're looking to springboard off that bowl season a year ago. The Cyclones returned one of the best backs in the league, a man by the name of David Montgomery. They got a 6th year from the NCAA for quarterback Kyle Kemp, so their backfield's looking good. They got 3 starters back on the offensive line as well. They need to find a way to get some of the new faces to mix in, though. That's going to be their new offensive line starters, as well as a wide receiver group that's losing Alan Lazard, who was a do-it-all player. Probably one of the best Cyclones of this century so far. But there's one thing to note about their wide receiver group. These dudes are massive. Hakeem Butler is 6'6". Matt Eaton is 6'4". They also have a nice tight end, Chase Allen, returning. He was a second-team All-Big Ten tight end a year ago in the conference. Defensively, this is how Iowa State got to a bowl game. They jumped from 86th in scoring back in 2016 to 26th in 2017. That's second-best scoring defense in the league last year. They get junior nose tackle Ray Lima back. He's going to be anchoring their 3-4 look. Overall, the Iowa State defensive line appears to be extremely deep, and the linebacking core returns Marcel Spears among other key players. I kind of like the secondary, though, as well, because they get back 3 prime contributors, including a really outstanding corner by the name of Brian Peavy. He is the program's active leader in starts, tackles, and interceptions. So that's a nice player to have back. There's a downside about Iowa State. This is, I got to be honest, they have a brutal first half of the schedule. They have road trips to Iowa City, TCU, Oklahoma State. They also host the Sooners. I think if they go really bad and they start 2-4, a bowl is honestly still doable with the back end featuring home dates against West Virginia, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas State to go along with a road trip to Lawrence as well as a game in Austin. But this is the exciting news, quite frankly, is if they can survive that trial by fire to open the season, they might just rack up enough victories in the second half of the season en route to an unbelievably unexpected trip to the Big 12 title game. They are the darkest of dark horses in the Big 12. But with so many experienced players returning, I kind of got a feeling that there's this notion in Ames that why not us? And that's an exciting place for the program.
It really is. I think we all really love what that coaching staff has done in such a short time. But Josh, you actually get a nice little 3-in-a-row spot here with preview. So why don't you continue on south from the state of Iowa to road trip. I should say southwest to Kansas. Yeah,
so we'll head from Ames over to Lawrence, and I've got some great news.
What's that?
Returns over 90% of their production from both sides of the ball this year. So if you believe experience matters, you got to like that.
Well, you also have to believe that experience matters when it comes to dealing with the track at the stadium.
Very true. Here's the really bad news for Kansas fans. The team, since their last winning season, is 20-88. And they are 5-74 in conference games. And for those of you wondering, their last winning season was 2008. So they have 3 quarterbacks in the fold. None of them are emerging, so none of that's reassuring. The offensive line just honestly is not any good. The running back and wide receiver groups appear to be serviceable, but not with this quarterback and not with this line group. Defensively, if they're going to have any improvement and honestly any wins this year, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Daniel Wise is coming back. That at least makes the defensive line a decent group. And the linebacking group is one of those experienced positions. So they also hired, and this is where I want to get to, is they hired Jeff Long as their athletic director. I've ragged on him for being fairly incompetent at his stops at Pittsburgh and Arkansas. And I like to kind of rag on him because he's hired some big names that have not lived up to expectations. He also hired Dave Wannstedt at Pittsburgh. So sometimes you bring in someone and not living up to expectations is sort of expected. But at Kansas, he's replaced an athletic director that in his 7 years fired Turner Gill after just his second season, hired and fired Charlie Weiss just 2 years later, realized that such a quick trigger means no self-respecting coach would want to go there. So he had to hire David Beatty, who mainly just texted 18-year-olds as a recruiting coordinator at Texas A&M, among other duties. So while Long makes me laugh out loud, quite honestly, at Kansas, he looks like a goddamn genius. So it might have a little bit of a turnaround thanks to the AD at least.
All right. Well, you're going to stay within the state and go to our favorite octogenarian coach.
I will. And so we'll go from Lawrence to the Little Apple. And Kansas State has a little bit new look, obviously not at the head coaching because Bill Snyder is really a tenured professor. He can go as long as he wants. But he got a new extension this week, 5 more years. Yeah, he did. Good for him. So he's got 2 new coordinators and 9 new starters on both sides of the ball. So this is one of the most consistent programs, it seems like, with Bill Snyder, but the 2018 team seems to go kind of against that trademark consistency. They've got a tight quarterback battle right now. I think Skylar Thompson is a little bit better thrower compared to Alex Delton, but man, Delton's a really lethal running back. So I'm glad I don't have to, or a running quarterback. So I'm glad I don't have to make this decision. And, frankly, that's why Snyder got that 5-year extension. The running back and offensive line groups are both very strong on paper right now. The receiving groups is 2 dudes that are legit and then all question marks. So the offense got to figure out a quarterback, got to figure out a wide receiver. More questions than even surface on that defense as the 2 leading tacklers from last year both graduated. They also have to replace the best run stopper, Will Gary. He was a force in the Big 12 throughout his career. They also have a ton of new specialists in the kicking game. So it's always fun to see K-State overachieve, and sometimes they even swipe the conference, but it's not happening this year. They have way too many new pieces. They have road trips to Morgantown, road trip to Norman, road trip to TCU, and they also have to play those scrappy boys in Ames. So I think you can forget about the Wildcats being a dark horse. They might be able to scrape out a bowl with somewhere between 6, maybe even up to 8 wins. Perhaps they pull off an upset and throw a monkey wrench into someone's season, but this is really, really far from being one of Snyder's best teams.
Well, next we get to go to Coach. Thank you for so patiently waiting.
I get to take a little bit of the show off now, right?
Yeah, just for a little bit.
All right.
But so we're going to bring in the lefty from the pen here.
Should we pull back the curtain a little bit on how we plan the show? Basically,
sure, why not?
We kind of took dibs on what teams we're curious about and what teams we're interested in and what teams we have a rooting interest in and what teams we just find having a fascinating offseason. And then once we kind of picked our teams in a pre-show meeting, we're like, well, let's go alphabetically. That makes the most sense. And then I looked at my lineup in the Big 12 and I'm like, ooh, I'm going to be talking for a lot.
Well, then you're going to get to hear a lot of my voice in the Sun Belt. So,
that's true.
But we have really yet to hear your voice, Coach. So why don't you get into a school that is not rebuilding, they are reloading in Oklahoma?
Yeah, they never rebuild in Oklahoma. Well, I don't want to say never, but they haven't in a while. So it's good to actually talk. I forgot kind of how this works. Thanks, Josh. You is pretty much the Josh Cook show. So
this is the Josh Cook Illegal Motion Hour.
That's right. So for Oklahoma, I mean, I guess the biggest obvious question is, can Kyler Murray replace the production of Baker Mayfield? If you want a little preview of it, do you guys remember when Baker Mayfield was suspended for the first series for grabbing his crotch?
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I love when there's hard discipline like that. So thank you, Oklahoma, for setting it.
If I remember correctly, Kyler Murray had like a 65-yard run.
No, it was 80 yards, first touch of the game. So Baker Mayfield lasted one play. So that gives you any indication on how Kyler Murray could do in Mayfield's absence. That should give you a pretty good indication that things will be okay. So for Oklahoma, let's see. Their entire skill unit comes back. Robbie Anderson returns. Fun fact, he didn't actually start until game 8 last year. Finished with 1,161 yards, scored 13 times, and made the All Big 12 team. Also, Hollywood Brown, or Marquise Brown, as people like to refer to him as well as CeeDee Lamb, come back in what is going to be a very, very, very deep receiving core. Offensive line, even though they're losing Orlando Brown, they project as one of the strengths of the team. They have just about every other starter coming back. They're solid in the 2 deep. They've got a ton of experience also returning on that side of the ball. So to say that Oklahoma is going to score a point is an understatement. So let's look at the defense. What do we know about Big 12 defenses?
They're awful.
They're awful. And Oklahoma was no different. They finished 87th in passing yards allowed. So quarterbacks like to play against Oklahoma. So for the defensive line, they have some solid experience with Amani Bledsoe and Marquise Overton, but there's a lot of youth behind them. In the DB unit, this 87th in the nation in passing yards allowed is not going to get much better, or I don't foresee it getting much better, because they only returned 4 upperclassmen out of the 13 overall scholarship players in the secondary. You have 1 senior in that group, Khalil Houghton. He's a safety. You have your cornerbacks returning as starters, so that's at least good. They're still young, though. Parnell Motley and Trey Norwood. Linebacker looks to be a strength for Oklahoma. Kenneth Murray was a freshman All-American, and Caleb Kelly was also a big-time playmaker for Oklahoma. So how do we project? Well, they have a tough schedule. They host FAU, which is if you listen to our CUSA preview, this is going to be a tough game. They also host UCLA in week 2. They're at West Virginia. They're at TCU this year. The good news is they host Bedlam, and the even better news for them, they host Kansas, so no track. So that should bode well for the Sooners. But not surprising, they're going to be strong every level on the defense. They're going to be strong in all positions on the offense. And Lincoln Riley comes back with the team better than ever, and doesn't look like they're going to miss Baker Mayfield too much. But that's a lot of talent to replace in one player. So it'll be an interesting year in Oklahoma. They'll just have to get a little bit more creative in how they move the ball. So I'm as excited as you can be to see Oklahoma run roughshod over the Big 12 again.
Kyler Murray is a really interesting guy to me. He was the number 1 dual threat quarterback in the country, if I remember correctly, Coach, right?
That's right.
And he was just drafted 2 months ago in June in the top 10 of the baseball draft.
That's right.
I don't remember who drafted him off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm going to look that up while you talk.
But he's just an interesting guy. He actually originally committed to Texas A&M. I think it was right after sort of the end of the Johnny Manziel era. And so I think a lot of the thought was, okay, this kid is he's obviously a phenomenal athlete. And so he would draft him. The Oakland Athletics. That makes sense. Yeah. He's obviously a phenomenal athlete, and he should succeed with Sumlin. And he went there for a year, and he backed up Kenny Trill, I think.
Yes.
But then he elected to transfer to Oklahoma,
where they both scattered.
Yeah. So and Kenny Trill obviously went to TCU. Just sort of an interesting confluence of events that have sort of led up to this point for Kyler Murray. I'm really excited to see what he can do. You mentioned, the one play when he quote unquote started that game. We're going to see a lot of that. Obviously, Lincoln Riley's offense is just an absolute perfect mesh for his talent. So,
and say what you want to about Oklahoma, they are fun to watch offensively. Just kind of what he does with the RPOs and the mixing of different concepts, and just keeping teams off balance stuff.
I find Lincoln Riley much easier to root for than Bob Stoops for some reason, but that's just a complete personal thing.
Yep, that is true.
All right, well, let's head from Norman to Stillwater, where we're going to meet a man. He's a man, gentlemen, and he is now 50. That is right. It's time for everyone's favorite mullet, Mike Gundy. Back for his 15th season at his alma mater, he has to replace the unbelievably prolific duo of Mason Rudolph and James Washington, as well as top number 2 receiver Marcel Aitman, and 2 all Big 12 linemen, I should say. Fortunately for them, they return who I consider probably the best starting tailback in the league in Justice Hill. The real question, though, is who's going to start behind center. They've got a senior walk-on in Tyler Cornelius, who has looked good in mop-up duty before, the grad transfer in Drew Brown, who comes from the Rainbow Warriors. Side note, I do not envy the geographical change from Honolulu to Stillwater, personally. They also have true freshman Spencer Sanders. Spencer Sanders, who was last year's Texas Gatorade and AP Player of the Year in Mr. Texas Football. Throw in sophomore dual threat quarterback Keandre Woodie, and it's as good a guess as any as to who's going to come out on top. Personally, I think it's going to be Cornelius starting on opening day, but I'm not going to be surprised if we see 2 or 3 of these guys early on in the season. After that, though, the line should definitely be above average in the Big 12 this year, especially with the return of Larry Williams. He was granted an extra year of eligibility after sustaining an injury very early on last year. Last year, Gundy fired longtime assistant Glenn Spencer and brought in former Dookie Jim Knowles to run the defensive unit. While the defense graduated 7 starters from last year, they bring back 6 seniors within their front 7 alone. The burden, though, is going to be on the secondary, as it always is in this league. Unfortunately for them, the Cowboys are very young and very thin in the secondary. A.J. Green and Rodarius Williams, both of whom flashed at times last year, but also got torched equally as often. They lose both their starting safeties from last year's squad, and they return literally 0 players with any starting experience at that position. They've got a potential All-American, though, in punter Zach Senior, but with their offense, he's probably not going to be on the field all that often. Oklahoma State gets West Virginia and Texas at home, as well as a visit from Boise State, which should be an intriguing early season matchup, but they have a lot of tough road games. Oklahoma, TCU, Kansas State, and Baylor. Double-digit wins, while not out of the question, is going to be very tough sledding. They're going to need to hope that their revamped defense plays dividends quickly. Personally, I've actually got them going 10-2. I think they're going to be really, really good this year and finishing 1 game behind our next team in the conference, who I'm also going to be previewing, and that is TCU. It's year 4 score and 7 years ago, Gary Patterson brought forth onto this continent a new age of TCU football, conceived in defense and dedicated to the proposition that all schools are created equal. Okay, well, it wasn't quite 87 years ago, but it really only feels that way since Gary Patterson took over at TCU. It's actually his 19th season at the helm of the Horned Frogs, where so far he has amassed a 160-57 record as their head ball coach. This season, they return a ton on defense and get a huge grad transfer in Northern Illinois linebacker Jawan Johnson. I'm excited about Ben Benogo, who spent the last 2 seasons behind Matt Boson at defensive end, and Nat will get the number 1 role as the number 1 pass rusher for this defense. The secondary loses starting corner Ray Anthony Tejada, and he was probably their best defensive back last year, but the rest of the secondary returns to be a very solid unit. On the other side of the ball, there's a little bit more question, though, at this point than there are answers. We're going to start at quarterback. Kenny Trill is finally out of our lives, and stepping for him should be sophomore Sean Robinson. He's a former 4-star prospect out of DeSoto, Texas, but unfortunately, he did not really impress in the limited chances he got last season. But he still broke spring ball as the number 1 guy on the depth chart. Frogs also returned 2 of their top 3 backs in Darius Anderson and Siwo Olunilua. That's a tough one, who combined last year for nearly 1,100 yards and 15 scores. Also back is Jalen Reagor, a guy who really showed out as a freshman last year at the wide receiver position. He comes back into his sophomore year as the undoubted number 1 guy. A longtime favorite of mine, Kevontae Turpin, is back for seemingly his 9th year on campus. He's going to be a factor in the deep passing game and the return game. He is one of the best in the country. Their offensive line loses a couple starters from last year, but they get a big JUCO guy in Anthony McKinney, who I'm expecting to start from day one. In the third phase, I already mentioned Turpin, who, an amazing returner. They also have a very solid punter in Adam Nunez. They're going to get a big test early, though, when they take on Ohio State in Jerry World week 3. If they can somehow get out of that with a win, they're going to have to hope that they don't suffer too much of a letdown because they head to Austin the following week. Fortunately for TCU, though, their 3 toughest opponents, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, are all in the Metro Dallas area. So, but I just mentioned a tough road trip for them week 4 to Austin, which is where we go next, where Josh is going to talk about the Longhorns.
Yeah, head on down to where Bevo sits and eats grass. And got to start with Tom Herman. I mean, he's their new coach, flashy hire, and his first season Austin last year, bit of a mixed bag. They went 6-6 before knocking off Missouri in the bowl to wrap at 7-6. But they could have been better. They lost twice in overtime. They also had a single-score loss to Oklahoma and one to Texas Tech. Of course, they could have been worse with an overtime win against Kansas State and a very hard-fought victory in Ames. So, it's tough to get a read on if that's where they should have been or if 7-6 was even an overachievement. One thing we do know, the offense scored nearly a touchdown less in Herman's first year than it did in Charlie Strong's final year. Offensively, they have a lot of nice pieces back, but they really need that offensive line to get going almost immediately. The defense was very good with Todd Orlando a year ago and has one of the best secondaries in the nation, especially thanks to some early enrollees coming in with their highly praised recruiting class. I got some skepticism, though. Tom Herman's got a really, really narrow track record. In that magical season 2015, those are basically all Tony Levine's players with some of Kevin Sumlin's last few pieces from his final few recruiting classes. Levine's 2013-2014 teams were combined 15-10, 10-6 in the conference. So let's not for 1 second pretend that Herman took over some 0-12 cast-off and turned them around. He took a good program and made it better in 2015. But in 2016, the team got worse. That's despite being better on paper, as in a really good recruiting class, including a guy that we talked a lot about in a previous show, Mr. Ed Oliver. Mm-hmm. So last year's Texas team, they went 7-6, 5-4, but I can't help and think what a more experienced coach would have done with that team. A coach who is less of a hype machine, hugging and kissing his players for the camera. And I can't help but think of what a coach would have done with that team with the name, say, I wonder what Charlie Strong would have done, given an extra year. I'm not sold on Herman. I'm certainly not sold on that offensive line. And I am for sure not sold on Texas competing this year in the Big 12.
Yeah, I have my question for them as well. Another team that's going to have a lot of questions and has a coach that's definitely on the hot seat. That's Texas Tech. Coach, why don't you take us out to Lubbock and break down what is happening out on the plains?
All right. Well, Coach Cliff Kingsbury, his seat is indeed red hot. You're correct about that. And he barely saved his hide with a comeback win over those Texas Longhorns you just discussed. So that made them bowl eligible, actually. So wouldn't you guess that Texas Tech, they can't figure out the defense. However, defense is not the biggest issue in this team. Offense, they can't seem to figure that out now either since Pat Mahomes left. So their offense features a ton of youth, some quarterback issues. They can't find one. McLean Carter and Jeff Duffy are the two that are battling out. For all practical purposes, they are equal and they're both dual threats. So I'm guessing we'll figure out week one who comes out of that race. Wide receiver / skill positions. All other skill positions, they lose 70% of their production to the NFL draft. The couple notable departees are Kiki Kuti and Dylan Cantrell. So I think Drake was writing about Kiki Kuti in Tech. So that's what I heard, at least. TJ Vasher is a sophomore receiver. He's the only returning regular player at the skill positions. So lots of new faces for the Red Raiders. However, offensive line is going to be a huge strength for the Red Raiders. All 5 of those guys return. And a fun fact about them is for 11 straight games, all 5 offensive linemen started and played and finished at their same positions for those 11 straight games. So that's a rarity in college football. Usually someone goes down, and then they start the shuffling. So at Texas Tech, they did none of that. So that's enough about the offense. Not a whole lot of experience coming back. Defense, however, they returned 9 starters. David Gibbs has also been on a slight rise in production. They made a 30-spot jump in scoring defense a year, or from 2016 to last year. They started at 128th and they finished at 98th. They made a 54-spot jump in run defense from 116th to 62nd. But they dropped in turnovers from 112th to 6th. So they increased 106 spots from 112 to 6 in turnovers. So lots of things happening for the Red Raider defense. They have defensive ends Eli Howard, tackle Broderick Washington. He's an All-American candidate. Dakota Allen. At linebacker, they have Jashawn Johnson. At safety, they have a cornerback, Justice Parker, who is nasty, covering in the slot. So what are they going to do? Well, they've got to figure this offensive thing out. They've got to figure who can make plays for them. You have to think TJ Vasher is going to be one of those guys, but who's going to throw it to him? So Cliff Kingsbury's job is on the line. They have to be bowl eligible, and it's going to be a struggle to do so.
All right. Well, finally for the Big 12, we get to the 10th team, West Virginia. The Mountaineers come into 2018 season with arguably the best quarterback-wide receiver combo in the country. That would be Will Grier to David Sills. But after that, there are a whole lot of question marks on this roster that Dana Holgorsen is going to have to answer. Outside of those 2 big names, though, another reason to get excited about West Virginia's offense is because they've got nearly their entire offensive line back, and they're a bunch of big boys. They average 6'5", 315. The receiving core behind Sills is also above average. Gary Jennings Jr. and Marcus Sims both come back. They have 2 big transfers eligible this season. Giovanni Hoskins, he's an H-back. He comes up from Miami. And TJ Simmons is a wide receiver coming from the Crimson Tide. However, the Mountaineers are going to have to replace top tailback Justin Crawford. He's with the Falcons now, but the Mountaineers will use a mix of Kennedy McCoy and Martell Pettaway to do so. I imagine McCoy will get the first shot to be the true number 1 back here. He put up some big numbers in a couple of league games before. On defense, coordinator Tony Gibson brings back a unit that was the worst during his tenure in Morgantown. So they're going to have to improve there. They also get a lot of new faces in the 2 deep this fall after they lose all 5 of their top 5 tacklers from last season. They have to replace middle linebacker Al-Rashid Benton, and they don't get Brendan Ferns back to do it as he was supposed to, but is now going to be out for the season with an injury for his 3rd consecutive year. The best unit on the D, though, is likely the defensive backs. As they get most of their top contributors back from last season, they'll be led by junior corner Hakeem Bailey. The Mountaineers have a tough schedule, though, this year. They open versus Tennessee and Charlotte, then head back to the Tar Heel State 2 weeks later to take on NC State, a team that we all like a lot. They have conference road games in Lubbock, Ames, Austin, and Stillwater. Those will all be toss-ups, as will home games for Kansas State and Baylor. Unless they can get their defense shored up real quick, I think we're looking at 6-6 or 7-5. I was actually really high on this team a couple months ago, but the more I look at that closely, the more concern I have between their schedule and overall talent level, especially on the defense. So time for us to get to our predicted standings and superlatives. So let's go worst to first. And Josh, why don't we start with you?
Will do. All right. My 10 hole, I got Kansas. And perhaps with a new AD, this is the first season in a very long road back to relevance. Got 9th place Baylor. Quarterback at least kind of appears set for an offense with a lot of questions. I think the defense should be improved. They even have a decent shot of going 4-0 to start the season. So believe it or not, bowl in play, I think, for Baylor. This league runs deep outside of Kansas. 8-hole, Texas Tech. They got to figure out defense. Obviously, David Gibbs helped improve things, but they need one more year, to me, to be a trend rather than just say that Coach GQ's turned it around. Kansas State in the 7th spot. Too many faces, especially on that coaching staff. 6th place, Matt, you just talked about them. West Virginia. God, I love that offense, but I have zero clue about that defense. 5th place, Iowa State. I like their experienced team. I like that the D is going to be very good again. I think if they survive that brutal first half, you're well positioned for dark horse run in the second half. 4th place, Texas. Talented on paper, but very thin. And like I said, I'm not sold on Herman. 3rd place, Oklahoma State. 7 starters back on that defense. Lots on the offensive line back. You talked about him, Matt. Justice Hill, that running back. Got to love that, whoever becomes the starting quarterback. Plus, it's Gundy. I will always pick Gundy to win, except against Oklahoma. 2nd place, TCU. League's best rush defense. They return a lot of key pieces, an absurd amount of skill position set. I think they'll find a way to figure out getting those new faces to work out. And that leaves the team that Coach put it so eloquently. Oklahoma reloads. They don't rebuild.
Coach, how you feeling?
Josh, I need you to report to the principal's office. There's been you're suspected of academic dishonesty here.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you took my list, I think.
Oh, no. This is the first.
But,
10 for 10.
10 for 10.
Ooh.
But unfortunately, you're bad at copying, and I have to make a couple of corrections. I'm not going to give Baylor any credit until they really earn it. And so they're going to be DFL. I think the fighting tracks are going to get them with the Jayhawks. So,
oh, my goodness.
DFL,
the fighting tracks. I love it.
Yeah, DFL, Baylor, obviously. KU coming in, that 9th hole. Texas Tech batting 8th. Kansas State, just too much turmoil not turmoil. That's not the right word, but too many changes, too many new faces in the coaching staff. They're about a year away from really competing again. Kansas State is finishing 7th. Back to Texas Tech, they have way too many question marks on offense, so they finished 8th. Iowa State, I like them in the 6th hole, mostly because I don't quite trust them to win the big games yet. So I think they finish 6th, just behind West Virginia by a razor's edge. West Virginia always finds some way to finish right in the middle of the pack, and they do so again next year. Texas, they finish 4th. They finish 4th in better fashion, but I don't think they're good enough to reach the top and really compete with OU year in and year out. Okie State finishing 3rd. They can't seem to find defense when they need it. They can't seem to find those clutch moments when they need them, but they're always electrifying and fun to watch. TCU, always one of the best defensive teams in this conference. They always find some way to compete and upset a lot of people and give everybody a hard time. So they're just kind of the model of consistency in this conference. And, of course, Oklahoma, they are built to reload every single year. They own this conference for the foreseeable future. Nothing changes with them this year. I think Lincoln Riley has got a juggernaut team out there in Norman.
Yeah, they've got it going, and it's going to be a little while till someone knocks them off. But again, I guess great minds just think alike. We are very, very similar. Bottom to top, Kansas. I'm with you, Josh. I feel a coaching change coming here pretty quick. Baylor in 2nd to last. Obviously, a little bit more bullish on them than Coach is. I outlined the reasons in my preview. Texas Tech 8th. Show me some defense and I'll move you up. Number 7, Kansas State, for the reasons we've all talked about. 6, West Virginia. I really wanted them to pick them higher, but I just can't at this point. I've got Texas lower than you guys. I've got them at 5th and Iowa State in 4th. Just a little flip-flop there. But the same top 3, Oklahoma State, TCU, and number 1, Oklahoma. Which leaves there will be a Big 12 championship game though this year between the top 2 teams. So we are all predicting that to be between Oklahoma and TCU. Everyone have Oklahoma winning that?
C,
senor.
All right. Offensive player of the year, Josh.
Well, since I'm so low on that defense, but I think they'll still be a little bit of a contender, I'm going to go with Will Grier over at West Virginia. Honorable mention, I love David Montgomery with Iowa State.
Coach?
I think he's going to be a huge part of offense in Norman, and I think that's going to be Kyler Murray.
I've got Will Grier by the slimmest of margins over Kyler Murray. Defensive player of the year, Josh.
Oh, man, that Horned Frog defense looks to be one of the few in this conference that actually cares, and I like Ben Benuga on that TCU defense. Yeah,
Coach.
Wow. I'm going to go with anybody that can make more than 2 tackles a game. But in all seriousness, Dakota Allen, I think, of Texas Tech, I think he's going to be the lone bright spot of that team.
All right. Defensive player of the year, I've written none. Defense is canceled. Coach of the year, Josh?
I think a lot of people are kind of down on recruiting, as in his own AD. I think people are down on, the window's closed, blah, blah, blah. I still pick them 3rd. I still really like Oklahoma State. I think Mike Gundy surprises people and therefore wins the Coach of the Year.
Coach?
Ooh, I mean, the easy pick would be Lincoln Riley because he owns the conference. But I think one of your most improved teams is going to be Iowa State, and I think Matt Campbell gets it.
Ooh, well.
I like that. Wow.
I've actually got Gary Patterson here. I've got them finishing.
It's going to take a hell of a coaching job for them to finish middle of the pack, given where they are in recruiting and resources and all that stuff. So why not?
Yeah, I'm taking Gary Patterson. I think they're going to push Oklahoma to the brink. I think they're going to finish this. I think they're going to upset Ohio State week 3, finish the season 11-1 in the regular season, and end up being the Coach of the Year. Rookie of the Year, Josh. I know you don't have one, so Coach.
Rookie of the Year. Ooh, I don't think there's going to be many freshmen of note. So I'm going to say, never mind here.
Yeah, I'm saying it's Kyler Murray just so I can give an award. He's a Rookie of the Year because he's a first-year starter. That's about all.
I'm thinking freshman.
Okay, yeah. That's like the Major League Baseball rules.
Yep.
Well, he played 100 games last year, but he started in the
he hasn't
minor league.
exhausted his rookie eligibility yet.
Yeah.
Josh, first fired.
Well, I'm generally proud of this. This is me sniffing around a conspiracy theory of my own making, and that is new athletic director Jeff Long. He's going to cut David Beatty real fast and bring in his boy, Brett Bielema, who I think actually might be a kind of a nice fit for Kansas, but that's my theory.
I think old Birdie would do well at Kansas. I think Coach GQ, they're going to finally cut him loose. And kind of an honorable mention to this list. He's not going to get fired, but I think he finally hangs it up with up there in Kansas State, the 150-year-old.
He just signed an extension.
He just signed an extension, man.
He's going to retire.
He signed an extension this week.
I know, but he's going to retire. I'm predicting it.
Maybe the extension's a golden parachute, and they'll honor it. They'll honor it, and then he resigns. But
see.
No, I think even the most diehard Kansas State fan would admit there's nothing to do in Manhattan. So, of course, Bill Snyder's going to keep coaching because there's nothing to do in Manhattan.
That's true.
He has nothing else to do with his time there. My first fired, I'm with you, Josh, David Beatty. So, all right, well, we're going to take a short break here, and we will be back after the jump to talk about the Fun Belt. And we're back, heading into the Sun Belt, where we are in for some realignment. Gone are Idaho and New Mexico State, and we get divisions for the first time, which will mean a championship game. That game is going to be held at the home of the school who has the highest ranking in the CFP. Personally, I think there are 3 teams that are true contenders in this league, but a lot of intriguing teams in the middle class. We're going to start in the East with one of those aforementioned contenders. That is Appalachian State. Josh, tell us what is happening out there in out there in Boone.
Yeah, well, the Mountaineers are going to be setting up a trend for several teams in this conference. And in fact, I'm previewing 2 of them, and that's replacing a quarterback. So out is outstanding quarterback Taylor Lamb. He finally graduated, much to the delight of the rest of this conference. The offensive line also had some key departures. So senior running back Jalen Moore really needs to bounce back after an injury-plagued 2017. But he has a ton of upside and was the 2016 offensive MVP of the Fun Belt. Also, App State runs a run-first offense, so that bodes well. D has to replace 6 starters and the defensive coordinator now that Nate Woody is over on the Georgia Tech staff. Their secondary is still strong. Nose tackle Mycon Stout helps anchor that 3-4. And that fantastic secondary is led by Clifton Duck. They will be a contender, like you said, Matt. But if you're going to nitpick, which you really have to do with such 3, upper crust teams, I'm going to highlight that I'm a tad worried about their schedule. It's a little bit harder than their own division foe, Troy, because App State has a roadie at Arkansas State, which is, as you'll see, is one of the nastiest trips to make in this conference. They also have to host an up-and-coming program in Georgia State a week before getting those Trojans.
Well, Josh, you are going to stick with us here and head down to Coastal Carolina and the Chanticleers.
I am, and this was a weird 2017. It was a disaster record-wise, but it was so long ago, I'm sure a lot of people forgot. And that is their head coach, Joe Moglia. He was on a health-related sabbatical and did not coach a single game a season ago. He is 51-15 with the Shanties. He won 3 league titles in 4 years over in the Big South. He won 10 games in 2016 as an FCS independent. Trying to debut in FBS is going to be hard. Trying to do it with an interim coach is not going to go well. And it ultimately led to that 3-9 record. And while I don't think Moglia will get them to double-digit wins, he's going to improve them. And also helping with that improvement is some nice depth at running back, some really nice-looking wide receiver groups. I like Burner, Kai John Tyler, and Malcolm Williams has tons of big play potential. Just ask those ULM Warhawks who watched him rack up 266 receiving yards on him a season ago. Offensive line went insanely young a season ago. That just means they get to have 4 sophomores to start this year. He has some new faces and a new defensive coordinator, so we won't really care about them because that's a tough read to get. But this is why you can't go too much on Coastal's rebuild. Nightmare schedule. I would say improving on last year's 3 overall wins and 2 league wins would be a great start. If they can go 5-7 and win 4 Fun Belt games, the good folks at Conway, South Carolina are going to be real happy.
As they should be. Joe Moglia, and also just hoping that he is back to full health. Obviously, missing the whole year was, I'm sure, difficult on him, on the whole team. So wishing Joe nothing but the best. We're going to head, though, now to the state of Georgia for the next 2 schools, Georgia Southern, Georgia State. Coach, it's your home state, so we're going to let you take it away for both of these.
All right. Well, I have a little bit of a soft spot for Georgia Southern because I was a host for the Atlanta affiliate of the Georgia Southern Radio Network, which I just got hit up on by on Facebook. So shout out to Chris Blair of the Georgia Southern. He's the voice of the Eagles of the Georgia Southern Radio Network. So for Georgia Southern, head coach Chad Lunsford takes over the permanent head coaching role after he finished last season as the interim. So his top priority, of course, has been reviving the triple option offense that Tyson Summers couldn't seem to get a hold of. So he's going to bring back. He brings in Bob DeBeese, who was with Willie Fritz at Sam Houston State, and he's also one of the ones that engineered New Mexico's offensive revival. So bringing back the triple option attack has been what Georgia Southern's been aiming to do. They averaged 20 points a game and 332 yards per game last year. The new scheme should help increase those numbers. Shai Wertz should take full command at the quarterback position. He ran for 722 yards and threw 7 touchdowns last season. But he is obviously with a full season. Shai Wertz should be good. Running the ball, of course, with the triple option attack is going to be a priority. They're not going to look like the typical spread option teams you see with Navy and Georgia Tech. They're going to be a little bit more out of the based out of the shotgun and different formations, but they're going to have the same principles. So they're looking for a big year out of senior Wesley Fields. He led the team with 811 rushing yards last season. They also need to find ways to get the ball into Ellis Richardson, who's their kind of tight end, H-back wing type guy as well. So on defense, they made a scheme change, and that's always tricky, but they're going to a 3-4 scheme, and that should kind of help them play with some of the spread teams that are all in the Fun Belt. Of course, the Fun Belt got its name for a reason. They should Tamarcio Reese and Todd Bradley are returning in the inside at linebacker, but of course those edge guys are a question mark for them. The Eagles should be the best among the pass. They only averaged giving up 230 yards per game last season. That is due in part to having the one of the top corner duos in all of Group of Five, really, in junior Monquavian Brinson and Kittle Vitter. So they should look for a resurgence down in Georgia Southern and try to get back to the success that they once enjoyed under Paul Johnson and, of course, the father of Georgia football, Irk Russell. So Chad Lunsford's doing a lot of big things, changing a lot of things. So it'll be interesting to see what they do down in South Georgia, down in Statesboro, as they continue to change and continue to kind of improve as the season wears on. So it'll be fun to watch. For Georgia State, they come back. It's going to be interesting for them as well. They're trying to build a culture of toughness. Sean Elliott comes over from South Carolina. They went 3-5 last year. They won a bowl game over Western Kentucky, actually, which was kind of more than you had hoped or more than you expected, really, from his debut in his first coaching season. He needs to for Georgia State, they need to infuse more of Sean Elliott's identity. They need to have a dual threat quarterback, but they need to establish the run as well. They have, all conference passer Connor Manning. He threw for 3,146 yards, but his departure, that makes things tricky for Travis Trickett, the offensive coordinator. So they're going to spread the ball out, and they're going to have a good plan as far as getting the ball to people, just like Dan Ellington, who comes with plenty of buzz. You also have Aaron Winchester and Jack Walker. As far as that goes, that'll be kind of your race there. But I think your JUCO All-American Dan Ellington will be the guy. They have a ton of playmakers. They have a transfer from South Carolina, Christian Owens. He looks to come in and do some damage. You have little guy Penny Hart. He has lots of heart, and he's just as big as a penny at 5'8". I know, I was waiting to do that joke. They actually have 4 starters returning on the offensive line, which coming into the season was a potential weakness, but they have 9 or 10 offensive linemen that they could all rotate for those, again, as I said, starters returning. That becomes a potential strength. But sometimes, when you're rotating that kind of numbers, you don't really have a solid unit. So hopefully some of that stuff will kind of pan out for them. So they got a lot of questions to fill on the offensive side of the ball, at least who the signal caller is going to be. But whoever it's going to be, they're going to have plenty of talent to throw to. Defensively, well, they're among the top 4 defenses in all of Sun Belt play last season, allowing only 24.8 points per game. That is also their lack of athleticism in the secondary. That wasn't exposed as much as it could have been. I guess they had some good pass rush and things like that. So, of course, they went out, and one of their goals in recruiting was to recruit some defensive backs. So they returned a lot of starters on the defensive front that held teams to an average of 136 rushing yards per game last year. So they've got some guys on that side of the ball that should make some plays. You have seniors Chase Middleton and Michael Shaw. You have Victor Hayward, Trajan Stevens, McQueen. Also, they emerged last year as true freshmen. So some as Dickie V would call diaper dandies coming in to do some solid work. Of course, you can't go without mentioning nose guard Dante Wilson, potential all-conference player. He had 4 sacks, 24 tackles a year ago. He should be this anchor in the 3-4 scheme for the Panthers of Georgia State. They return for their second season in the old Turner Field, so it should be a interesting year as they look to improve on their 7-5 record. Can they do it? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, Coach, I would love to get down there with you for a game. That could be a lot of fun at Bill Braves ballpark.
Oh, yeah, it really could be, and just kind of figure. It'd be fun to just walk around and figure out what they've renovated, what they preserved, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, if any friend of the show wants to bring us down, we are always open for the invitation. Maybe they could be taking on the final team here in the East, Troy, who is definitely one of the favorites. Josh,
they are the defending champions, and they have the skill position players, especially at wide receivers, with 3 starters back, led by DeAndre Douglas and a Louisville transfer who kind of knows a little bit about offense to boost that group. So you got to love that skill position group. And the defense should be outstanding again. It was the league's best a year ago. They get back 5 key players. And defensive coordinator Vic Koenning is really good at his job. Just ask the Illinois fans. And that wasn't sarcasm, by the way. They really wanted him as their coach recently, but it didn't happen for them. Replacing Brandon Silvers under center, that's going to be a theme, like I said. It's going to be tough, but I love the pieces around whoever eventually settles into that starting gig. And they have, honestly, all season to figure out that side of the equation because their last game of the year is at Appalachian State, and that should be the game that determines the East.
Yeah, that's basically the de facto East title game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to head to the West now, and that means the other conference favorite going into the season. That is Arkansas State, the Red Wolves. Coach, they're a machine at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it doesn't matter who's calling plays. Head coach Blake Anderson actually took over the play calling duties. I guess he wasn't too pleased with how Buster was calling it 2 years ago, so he kind of decided he was going to try that. Buster did not relinquish all of his offensive coordinator duties, just play calling on game day. They led the league. They led all of Sun Belt. They ranked 5th in the FBS in throwing per game by launching 342 yards per game. They have a fast up-tempo system. They return, actually, their quarterback, Justice Hansen. He passed for almost 4,000 yards and 37 touchdowns last season, shattered all kinds of school records. Also, his go-to receiver late last season was a 6'6" senior, Justin McKinnis. He caught 22 for 409. Omar Bayless, who comes back as a 6'3" junior, caught 6 touchdown passes. He also has other tall targets, if you catch my drift here. 6'5" senior Kendrick Edwards and 6'4" Oklahoma transfer Dahu Green. So they got a lot of talent, a lot of big, imposing bodies there for Hansen to throw to. And they're deeming a few of those guys, especially Dahu Green, as potential NFL guys. 5'5" senior Warren Wand, who goes in the opposite adjective category, returns in the backfield as a running back who had 860 all-purpose yards in 10 games. Armand Weiwei, he is a 215-pound senior who is going to factor in this year more, hopefully, more so than last year because of injuries. So offensively, it's going to be a track meet. It's going to be electric. There's going to be a lot of huge plays, figuratively and literally. And so I'm excited about what they can do. Of course, they led the Sun Belt in scoring as well. And their offense was among the nation's least efficient in the red zone, however. So we're going to see what they can do in obvious running situations. We're going to see kind of what they can do and how they can improve in the red zone. Having 6'6" and 6'4" and 6'5" receivers down in the red zone should be a little bit easier as well. And it should be a little bit easier that they have 4 starters returning on the offensive line. So what's not to like about this ASU offense, especially with all Sun Belt tackle Leonard Bonner being among those 4 returning starters on the offensive line. Defensively, they had a key losses at each level of their defense. They ranked 3rd in the Sun Belt in yards allowed, 4th in scoring defense. They lose Javon Roland Jones, who finished his career 2nd among FBS players in total sacks. I think he was one of my predictions a year ago for Conference Player of the Year. I think he was pretty close. Ironically, also Raheem Bingham, who ran the 40-yard dash in 4.5 seconds. He also had 5 sacks. He was also all Sun Belt Conference. He leaves, but they have a bunch of guys coming in to replace him. Ball State transfer Kevin Turman is one of them. Senior Christian Howard, also down on the inside, is somebody that could be an answer there. They have one of the best defensive backs in the conference, Justin Clifton. He is a cornerback, mostly plays in the nickel position. They have strong safety B.J. Edmonds, who made a lot of strides last year and is only getting better. They are lacking experience overall at the cornerback position, but if you have Justin Clifton, they should be able to bridge that gap a little bit with his experience and imparting that wisdom as well. So what are they going to do? Well, they also have a gifted punter who probably won't get a whole lot of action this year, Cody Grace. He'll probably be on the sidelines a lot. They have place kicker Sawyer Williams, who will probably be kicking just a lot of extra points. He was 16 of 22 on field goals, and he was just 4 of 9 from 30 to 39. So they have a few holes to fill on defense. That'll be the question mark for the Red Wolves. But they're going to be very explosive on the offensive side of the ball, and they look poised to cruise to another divisional title.
All right. Well, the rest of the West is definitely an interesting hodgepodge, and yours truly gets to go through the next 3 schools. So sit back, relax, buckle up. We're about to go for a bit of a ride. We're going to start in Lafayette, where it is the dawn of the Billy Napier era. And I must say that calling a head coach Billy seems just a bit odd. But nonetheless, the former Arizona State offensive coordinator.
But his mom likes referring to him as Billy.
I'm sure she does. I'm sure she's a good woman,
Billy?
Too. Nonetheless,
sure you go recruiting.
The former Arizona State offensive coordinator steps into a situation that could be promising for the first-year head coach, as he inherits a veteran team that had a top recruiting class in the conference as recently as 2015. The biggest task for this time, though, might be rebuilding the offensive line, which is one of the worst in the country last year. Napier brought along with him Sun Devil offensive line coach Rob Sale. He comes from Tempe to Lafayette, where in only one season at Arizona State, their Big Ugly showed a huge improvement. So he's hoping that they can do the same for the Raging Cajuns.
Now, Matt, I gotta ask a question. You just mentioned a lot of Arizona State people. Did something happen in Tempe in the offseason that would make people flee that program like rats on a ship?
Yeah, there was an incident where the new athletic director hired one of his old friends, a guy who's just been talking head on TV for about 15 years and hasn't coached in college since the Reagan administration.
Oh, well, that sounds disastrous. Hopefully there wasn't any like insider trading, like the athletic director, I don't know, was like an agent or something for the other coach. I don't know.
No, that would never happen under the NCAA's watch.
No, never.
Well, for those rats who got off the ship in time, the ones who made it to Lafayette get to bring back with them sophomore tailback Trey Regis. He's someone that could be a sleeper for Fun Belt Offensive Player of the Year. As a freshman, he really flashed in a couple of games, and the Napier-Sale combination likes to run the ball a lot more often than it might seem at first sight when you think about Arizona State. They actually ran the ball much more than you would think. The wide receiver group here is probably the deepest on the offense. They bring back 4 experienced upperclassmen receivers led by former SMU transfer Raheem Malone. Quarterback 3-man race this year between Jordan Davis, Andre Nunez, and Levi Lewis. Davis coming off of a season-ending injury last year, and neither Nunez nor Lewis really showed out during Davis's injury last year. But no matter who starts, though, the offense is pretty much guaranteed to far outpace the defense. The 2017 Raging Cajuns defense was one of the worst in the history of college football, and they graduated a bunch of players. To top that off, they've had 2 different defensive coordinators during just this offseason. The first guy that Napier hired, Carl Scott, left after only 1 month with the program to become Alabama's defensive backs coach. So now ULL's defense is going to be run by former Southeastern Louisiana head coach Ron Roberts. The only position of strength, and I'm using the word strength as in a very relative sense, is safety, where they get back both their starters from last year, Travis Crawford and Corey Turner. Other than that, however, it is a very green unit. Games at Mississippi State and Alabama are guaranteed losses. They might be favored at home against Coastal Carolina, and obviously they will be against Grambling State, but that could be it. 4 wins this year would be a really good start. Heading to their rivals, the other half of the battle on the Bayou, we get into Matt Viator's 3rd year coaching the Warhawks. In his first 2 seasons, Monroe has definitely taken some steps forward, especially on offense, where they averaged 42 points per game in conference play last year. They get almost everyone back from that team on offense, including quarterback Caleb Evans and receivers Marcus Green and RJ Turner. Green is also an outstanding kick returner. He averaged 32.4 yards per return last year and had 4 touchdowns on kick returns. The offensive line brings back 6 players who have 72 starts between them, with some good depth behind them as well, including 354-pound Yog Savage. He is a very large man with a very mean streak. Running back, though, is of greater concern, where Derek Gore, former Crimson Tide recruit, averaged only 3.6 yards per carry last year, but he was actually solid, though, in the receiving game. The Warhawks have 2 redshirt freshmen who should push Gore in Jekiel Holmes and Javin Myers. They're both high 3-star recruits coming out in the 2017 prep class. One thing that ULM has in common with their Raging Cajun brethren, though, is a god-awful defense. Although not as historically inept as their compadres in Lafayette, the Warhawks were still pretty terrible, finishing number 128 out of 129 teams in FBS in total defense. That being said, they've got a little bit more talent coming back than the Raging Cajuns. I'm kind of high on David Griffith, who was the last year's team's 2nd leading tackler and a constant presence in opposing backfields from the outside linebacker position. Although they get a lot of players back, it's not exactly like they're getting back kids who were blue chippers coming out of high school. This is a team with a lot of growing still to do, especially defensively. I think that they'll win more games than Lafayette, mostly because they have a bit of an easier schedule. A bowl game is attainable, but it's going to require upsetting either the Mustard Buzzards in Hattiesburg week 2 or pulling off 2 road wins in conference, which are both going to be tough to come by. My third team in a row here is South Alabama. Last year, Joey Jones stepped down as the head coach at the end of the season, taking the South Alabama program from the cradle to the promised land of the Sun Belt in less than a decade. He was the first and only coach in program history up until they replaced him with Steve Campbell, who, Josh, this dude might have the most quintessential Sun Belt resume of all time. this is a direct quote from SB Nation. I don't want to, but it's pretty phenomenal, so I wanted to share it with everyone. Quote, Steve Campbell was Troy's starting center when the Trojans won the Division II title in 1987. He led Delta State to Division II title as a head coach in 2000, then spent one season at MTSU as the offensive coordinator and one as Jackie Sherrill's line coach at Mississippi State. He won 87 games in 10 years at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, 90 miles from Mobile, and spent the last 4 seasons at Central Arkansas. He won 20 games in the Southland title the last 2 years, reaching the second round of the FCS playoffs each season. 2 years ago, his Bears beat Arkansas State. If that's not the most quintessential Sun Belt recipe, resume, I should say, for a head coach, I don't know what is. His entire life has been building to this exact moment.
I mean, like, yeah, so many webs. It's crazy.
So one of the biggest moves that Campbell made was hiring Troy co-offensive coordinator Kenny Edenfield. We all know how well Troy has done over the past decade, and Edenfield was a big part of it. Edenfield is a big believer in the quick passing game, and South Alabama has a very solid receiving core led by Jamarius Way, the Jaguars' leading receiver from a year ago. He averaged 16.2 yards per catch. Behind him, every single receiver who caught a pass last season is also back. But while the receiving core looks good, the same cannot be said about the running backs and the run game in general. Last year, they were one of the worst teams in the country running the ball, 125th in total rushing, so there's really nowhere to go but up. Trey Minter, last year's starter, is back, but they also bring in 2 big recruits in Carlos Davis and Jared Wilson, both of whom should get some reps this season. No matter who is toting the rock, however, the line will be a strength of this team, led by all-conference left tackle Noah Fisher and 5 other players who return with starting experience, and they very O-line heavy recruiting class from this past spring. Behind center, looks like it's going to be Cephas Johnson, a 6'5", 225-pound redshirt freshman, as the main man. He ended spring ball as the number 1 quarterback, and personally, I think he's got the potential to be one of the best quarterbacks in the conference in a couple of seasons. I'm also not worried about him off the field in terms of his academic workload. Guys, he is a leisure studies major. I can't make that up. I don't know what is involved as a leisure studies major, but I can't imagine that it's a whole lot of work.
Leisurely.
Well, when he came over from Conway,
Lawn chairs.
Lawn chair. What did you say, Coach?
He plans the designs for the lawn chairs.
What about the lawn games?
He coordinates that too.
Okay. So he's a good guy to have at a cookout.
Yes, great guy to have at a cookout.
All right. Well, Cephas, you're always invited.
Yeah.
But when he came over from Conway, Steve Campbell brought with him Greg Stewart, his defensive coordinator for the Bears. Last year against FCS opponents, Central Arkansas allowed only 14 points per game. Stewart gets a defense that has a very solid D-back unit, but not much else. But then again, seeing as it's the Sun Belt, having good D-backs is a good place to start. I'm excited about the potential of this unit. They've got 8 guys that could be big contributors, including Notre Dame transfer Spencer Perry. The secondary has a chance to be truly special, but that's also going to depend on what happens along the front 7. There's some depth, but not a ton of talent along the D-line. The top 6 guys in the rotation are all upperclassmen, but I wouldn't be surprised if redshirt freshman Jelon Sheffield ends up flashing and being the best of the bunch. I love South Alabama's punter-kicker combo, Corliss Waltman and Gavin Patterson. They're both potential all-conference performers, with Waltman having the shot of being an All-American. They could be the difference in tight games. I think they could surprise some people this year, but they've got some serious road tests. They're at Oklahoma State, Memphis, App State, and Arkansas State. Factor in Troy and Louisiana Tech at home, and that's probably 6 losses right there. Could they run the table against the rest of the competition? Potentially. I think that's going to depend on how much growth we see out of Cephas Johnson, but I wouldn't bet on them running the table against the rest of those opponents. 5-7 feels about right here. So finally, though, we're going to the program probably with the most to prove right now, and that is Texas State. And, Coach, that is your school for our last one of the night.
All right. Well, if you were looking for Everett Withers, we found him. He is actually at Texas State as the head coach. So let's dive right in. So They have an interesting deal here. Brett Elliott is one of the headline additions, and he's actually a coach. He's a former Mississippi State offensive coordinator. He comes back to coach the quarterback position. He brought in two guys, sophomore Willie Jones and freshman Jalen Gibson. So those two are going to be battling it out at the quarterback position. They have Elijah King coming back. He's graduated, but he decided not to take on a grad transfer anywhere. They returned their top 5 rushers. 3 of those were running backs who combined for 1,093 yards and over 4 yards per carry. That's Anthony Taylor, Jalen Nelson, Robert Brown, and, of course, Anthony Smith as well. Up front, they have to replace their all-Sun Belt tight end, Gabe Schrade, but they have Elijah Rogers and Brendan Rushing to take on that burden. They combined for only just 4 receptions a year ago. One or more of the incoming tight ends also freshman-wise could play. On the offensive line, Tristan Mazirak is graduating early, but he's opting to forgo his senior season. You have Aaron Brewer, who's going to be the guy on the offensive line. They're going to be very, very young in the trenches, so that's going to be intriguing and also troubling for the Bobcats. They return 3 starters. They have a lot of key reserves coming back. Despite being very, very young, they are experienced, so that's why it's intriguing and troubling all in the same, because even though you're experienced, youth can be a factor for or against you. So defensively, they bring in a brand new defensive coordinator, Chris Woods. He was a defensive specialist at Oklahoma, so a lot of people are plucking from that Oklahoma tree here in the Sun Belt. They will keep the 3-4 base scheme. They have 7 of their top 10 tacklers from a year ago returning. You have Brian London, who had 91 tackles, and Frankie Griffin, who had 74. Those 2 were linebackers, and they lost 2 starters from there, and they've pretty much gotten stronger. So Kansas State transfer defensive tackle Jordan Mitty will bolster the Bobcats up front on the defensive line. So this scheme is going to be the Bobcats are going to be very reliant on their defense as they bring back a lot of playmakers in that 3-4 scheme. They're going to be especially strong at the linebacker position. So they have only 12 seniors on the roster. They're fielding a very young team, but that inexperience turns into experience. So that does bode somewhat well, but who knows if it'll translate into a winning season, because youth is youth, experience is experience, and inexperience can be once again inexperience when you have a lot of youth and a lot of youthful mistakes. So they will be good. Look for Texas State to be really good in this conference within a year or two, with all these underclassmen turning into seniors. So not going to expect much out of Texas State this year, but in Withers' 3rd year, they should be, like I said, they should be pretty good when these young guys turn into seniors.
Definitely. All right. Well, let's go worst to first, starting in the East, Josh.
Yeah, you got it. All right. So my worst to first, I got Coastal Carolina. The division is the better of the 2, so they have to deal with that. And they're just still too inexperienced, especially on defense, getting that new defensive coordinator. 4th place, I got Georgia Southern. They had that nice second half a year ago. They're getting back to that option attack like Coach talked about, but still pretty green. I got 3rd place, Georgia State. They made that bowl in Sean Elliott's debut. Some nice defensive pieces back and a reliable special teams unit. That'll allow this team to overcome some of those changes Coach talked about on their offensive play. But they got to play road games against Troy and App State. It's not an easy way to win this division. Appalachian State, they're going to be able to run the ball like their defense. I'm just not sure they're going to squeeze enough out of that passing game to knock off Troy, who has the best skill position group in the division. And they have some really, really nice defensive pieces. One I'll be talking about when we get to the accolades.
All right, Coach, how about you?
Well, Josh, we're almost exactly identical again. Worst to first, I think Coastal, they're going to have a tough go at it in a very tough division. I think Georgia State will have a few answers to or have a few questions to answer in year two under Sean Elliott. I think they finished fourth. I think Georgia Southern returning back to having a full year in that potent triple option attack. Something that they are used to, just so you'll see a lot of production out of them. Troy, of course, always strong. They'll finish second, but Appy State, I think this is their division for a while, so I think they're going to win it, and I think they're going to do so by a couple of games, really.
All right. I've also got Coastal Carolina finishing last in this division. They'll be an improved team, but still, probably 3 wins, 4 wins is a good season for them. Coach, I'm with you. I think Georgia State's going to fall off a little bit in year 2 under this regime. I've got them finishing 4th in the East. Georgia Southern, bring back the triple option, bring back the positive results. I've got Georgia Southern going bowling this year. App State as the runner-up for me, just not quite as talented as Troy is. Let's do the West quickly, Josh. What are you looking at?
Yeah, I got Texas State finishing last. The rebuild looks a little more promising with Brett Elliott back on that coaching staff. And like Coach said, they're so young. Then I got Louisiana. Man, they played Big 12 defense a year ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm expecting the same this season. Third place, South Alabama. You talked about the previous coaching staff, Matt. They were consistently mediocre under him. But
yeah, they have literally an entirely new coaching staff this season.
Yeah.
Every single position is new.
I know. But I still think their D is better than Louisiana's. I mean, you talked about they were historically awful, the Raging Cajuns on defense. So I went with the Jags. I got the Warhawks. Second place. They got an amazing offense. And, well, maybe they'll play some defense this year. We'll see. That leaves Arkansas State, the undisputed champs of this division. Amazing quarterback leading what's going to be an amazing offense.
Coach, how about you?
Well, Josh, you couldn't have said it better yourself. I'm going to say ditto, but for show purposes, I'll actually list it out. Texas State, the rebuild is again, just way too much. As I said, I think they have too many question marks this year, but they're going to be hell next year and the year after. Louisiana Lafayette, there's a lot to be said about not playing defense, and that much is they're going to finish 4th in this division, only because Texas State is so young. South Alabama, I should say, brand new coaching staff, so they're kind of a mixed bag. So why not middle of the pack in the division? ULM, electric on offense, but they finished 2nd only because Arkansas State is kind of the Oklahoma of this conference. They return a lot of studs on the offensive side of the ball, and they're even more electrifying offensively. Justice Hansen, is going to have a really big year.
All right. For me, I've got Texas State finishing in dead last by a couple games here. 4th, Louisiana Lafayette, and 3rd, Louisiana Monroe. I'm actually pretty high on South Alabama. I've got them finishing 2nd this year, and I think that Cephas Johnson's going to be a big reason why. He's a big, strong athlete at quarterback, and I think he's going to be special for them. But there are no teams in this division that are a match for Arkansas State that are probably even in the same zip code. Quite frankly, Arkansas State has something special. So Josh and I both have Arkansas State versus Troy as the title game. Coach has got Arkansas State versus App State. Josh, who's your champ?
Yeah, the Red Wolves offense was amazing a year ago and kind of just had some hiccups late in that season. Dropped the title game a year ago, then dropped the bowl game. I think they're going to be really, really hungry. That offense looks unstoppable. I'm going to go with the Red Wolves getting back on top again this year, where they frankly feel like they are every year.
Coach?
Arky State. I think Arkansas State, the Red Wolves are going to are going to take the conference. I think Justin Henson is going to have a huge year, and they're going to add conference title accolades to his resume this year.
I'm in complete agreement. I've got Arkansas State running away with it. Offensive Player of the Year, Josh.
Well, I'm staying in Jonesboro yet again. Justin Henson, quarterback, done.
Coach?
Justice Henson, excuse me. I said Justin.
Justin. I said Henson. You said Justin. But somewhere in between, it's Justice Hanson, and he's going to be your Conference Player of the Year.
Yes, he is. I am in agreement on that one.
I'm going to put it real simply. When he starts tearing up the NFL, everyone's going to be saying his name because that's the talent he's got in his arm.
Yeah, he's definitely a special player. Defensive Player of the Year, Josh.
Yeah, I think Troy, to get back to the title game, is going to rely on their outstanding linebacker, Hunter Reeser.
Coach?
So for the Mountaineers, even though they lose their defensive coordinator, it's going to be, your choice of Eric Boggs or Clifton Duck. So I'm going to go with Clifton Duck at cornerback. He's going to wreak havoc in that Mountaineer safety.
Quack, 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 Mr. Ducksworth. I'm with you, Coach. Give me Clifton Duck as the Defensive Player of the Year. Coach of the Year, Josh.
This one was really, really tough for me because there's 3 contenders, and so you kind of just got to pick one of them. And looking at some of the pieces Troy lost, I'm thinking Neil Brown's going to have to do some amazing, amazing coaching to get them back to the title game, so I went with him.
Coach?
Matt, you in your divisional previews or your divisional standings reveal, you said that Georgia Southern was going to be bowl eligible. Former interim coach Chad Lunsford getting the Georgia Southern Eagles bowl eligible will also earn him Coach of the Year honors.
All right. Well, I'm keeping it simple. Arkansas State's the best team in the conference this year. They have the best offensive player, and they're going to have the best coach. I'm taking Blake Anderson. Even if they are expected to do that well, they're going to be something like 11-1, if not better. So, Rookie of the Year, Josh. You probably don't have one, Coach.
Get back to me in 2 years when I'm previewing this conference.
Coach,
I don't care about new players.
Rookie of the Year. That depends if what's his face? If Jalen Gibson, if he as a redshirt freshman, if he produces well for Texas State, he could be Rookie of the Year at that quarterback position.
I'm going to pull
potential candidate.
I'm going to pull back the curtain for the second time on the show.
Okay.
I'm sure some Sunbelt fans are going, man, they're tripping over names. They're tripping over Justice Hanson. They're saying, what's his face for Rookie of the Year? We do a ton of prep work for this show. I had a family commitment tonight that resulted in us recording this at 11 p.m. So all of us are tired. And for me, at least, went out to have a very nice dinner and had some libations. So it happens. We love the Sun Belt. We put in the time and effort. We apologize for tripping over a couple names late at night.
Well, Rookie of the Year, for me, it's Runaway Man. I've talked about him so much tonight. I might have to change my middle name to Cephas, baby. Cephas Johnson. I love this kid. I really, really love this kid. I think he is going to be really special. That's why I've got South Alabama as second in the West. And maybe in a couple of years contending for a Sun Belt title. First coach fired, Josh?
This one was tough because the guy who has the worst record is Everett Withers, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. His record in San Marcos is god-awful. But at the same time, he was really, really good at James Madison, and if I were the AD, I'd give him a 4th or even 5th year because it's Texas State. They're a young FCS program. And among the FCS, they're one of the youngest rosters. So I would give them some chance. Unfortunately, Texas football mindset trickles down even to a Texas State. So we'll see. Good luck, Coach Withers.
Coach?
I think Coach Withers will survive. I think I'm going to amend the question and say first coach gone.
Ooh.
And I think Blake Anderson is going to move on to a Power 5 job, perhaps maybe Maryland, because he's a Maryland guy.
Oh,
so
Coach.
Whoa.
All right. Well,
I thought my David Beatty for
Brett Bielema
was going to be the bombshell of the show, but get it in late, Coach. Well done. Oh,
wow.
Yeah, Blake Anderson.
I feel like
leave.
Oh man, yeah. Coach, you just completely blew my mind. I'm going with Everett Withers just because I feel like, he's really the only one I can imagine being fired this season.
Hey, he went 7-6 with North Carolina when they got rid of Butch Davis, and I believe 2 shows ago I had Fedora first fired. So maybe Everett Withers just heads back to Chapel Hill.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, they're going to have to be good, though, and I don't think they're going to be good.
So, Josh, to further bolster your point about late night and bumbling over some names, one of the names I've bumbled over is probably one of Georgia's most legendary assistant coaches, Irk Russell, and the father of Georgia Southern football. I mean, he has a statue named after, or he has a statue constructed of him.
Would you call him Ray Goof?
What's that?
Would you call him Ray Goof?
Ray Goof. Yeah, no, that's the greatest coach in Georgia history because it got us Donnan, which got us Richt, which then in turn got us Kirby Smart. See the connection? See, if Ray
I like what you did there, Coach.
Listen to this connection here. If Ray Goof wasn't so bad, Jim Donnan would have never been hired. Jim Donnan would have never recruited Kirby Smart, who then would have a 20-something year coaching career and wind up back in Athens to coach the Dogs. So, therefore, we would not have been in the national championship last year. So, in turn, thank you, Ray Goof.
Wow, Coach, that logic is unassailable.
I know. I'm here all night.
Well, I actually think we don't need to be here all night because I think that's it. That's our first coach fired. That's the Big 12 and the Sun Belt. It's going to be a fun year, and so I'm pumped about Sun Belt football this year. There's so many unknowns. So, we are going to be back at you next time with the Big 10 and the MAC. Look for that in your feed later this week. But before we go, Josh, any final words?
Yeah, just keep checking out the blog, Big 10 and Counting. We're finishing up some of our previews, looking at doing 4 more this week to get back on track. Only got 1 done last week due to some time constraints, but that happens. But I got 4 ready for posting, so be on the lookout for those.
All right, Coach, any final words from you?
Yeah, watch out for the toppers in week 1. That is the Hillwood Hill Toppers. And our new electric green helmets as we host Columbia Central, the Columbia Central Lions, in our the first stop on the Kurt Page Revenge Tour.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for me here. So on behalf of the coach here in the Music City and our intrepid blogger from Big 10 and Counting, Josh Cook, up there in the Second City, this is the Professor in Nashville saying so long and see you next time on the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast.
Watch out for that track.
Thanks for listening to the Illegal Motion College Football Podcast. To get in touch with the show, email us at illegalmotionpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at illegal_motion.